So just to recap on last week's session, we talked about the pride of King Nebuchadnezzar and how God originally used him to do his will in subjugating the God's people, this Babylonian king, and how the remnant of Israel was taken to Babylon after Jerusalem was sacked and everything else was torn down. So we remember that the temple was also destroyed during the sacking of Jerusalem. But we also found that the remnant of Israel that was in Babylon were kind of the higher crust of people, we might say, and a lot of them found positions of authority and influence within the Babylonian kingdom, and Daniel, of course, was one of them. And so when Nebuchadnezzar has this weird dream, it's almost like when Pharaoh had his dream in Egypt and Joseph interpreted the dream. Did you guys see any similarities with what Joseph did and what Daniel did? So Daniel was able to interpret that dream, and it happened. So they also learned that Daniel has some powers of, if not astuteness, then at least a connection with God, or a connection with some kind of divine inspiration or knowledge to be able to define the meaning of dreams. But so Nebuchadnezzar spent what, 7 years living like an animal before he came back to himself. Yeah. So we're going to deviate from that story in this second session a little bit as we look at some Psalms. And I thought that session 2 really played in with where we are in 2021 as we walk through a time of difficulty and strife. And one of the ways that we get through that is to remember that God is continuing to walk with us, and God has done this in the past. And so let's begin there. But before we do, let's pray. The Lord be with you.
Also
With you.
Good and gracious God, we ask that you be with us over the next hour, that our conversation may be fruitful, that we learn more about you and your intent and your hope and purpose for our lives. Send us your Holy Spirit that we may glean any wisdom we may from the material and from your holy word. These things, God, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so just like we did last week, I'll read the introduction to this, and then we'll read the text. But we'll read the text as we go along this week, I think. So this is serving God in humility, which was what Nebuchadnezzar didn't have in the last one. But there are times when we don't appreciate what we have until it's taken away. Prior to their exile to Babylon, it certainly seemed that a majority of the people of Judah and Jerusalem had no regard for God, the temple, or the covenant. Because of the repeated refusal to listen to the prophets, God sent them and to repent of their wrongdoing. The time came when God let them reap the consequences of their own decisions. Their land was conquered, the temple was destroyed, and they were exiled from their homes. Just as God intended, the exile caused people to think about what they had lost. They began to reach out to God again. Jeremiah's prophecies started to come true. For I know the plans I have for you, declared the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Though it would take 70 years to fulfill Jeremiah's prophecy of restoration, not long after the temple's destruction, the exiles' hearts began to yearn again for God and their covenant relationship with him. They expressed their sorrow, loss, grief, and yearning for restoration by means of the Psalms. And in particular, we'll see that these are Psalms of lament. But Now, hopefully you've already read this chapter. You would have noticed that there's a lot of correlation, again, of what he's talking about and what we've been walking through over this past year. We really miss what we don't have. We miss regular service. We miss being able to meet without face masks. We miss all these like typical things that we used to do, and it's been difficult. And maybe we'll talk in a wrap up of this session. But one thing to think about as we go through our materials right now is, has this time period brought you closer to God or made you more aware of the necessity of God in your life? But let's get on with Psalm 74, verses 1 through 23. And this is a longer reading. 74. I was looking at the wrong psalm. Yeah, so it is just the entirety of the psalm. Would anybody care to read that?
I will.
Thanks, Sherry.
Oh God, why have you rejected us forever? Why does your anger smolder against the sheep of your pasture? Remember the nation you purchased long ago, the people of your inheritance whom you redeemed, Mount Zion, where you dwelt. Turn your steps toward these everlasting ruins, all this destruction the enemy has brought on the sanctuary. Your foes roared in place where you met with us. They set up their standards as signs. They behave like men, wielding axes to cut through a thicket of trees. They smashed all the carved paneling with their axes and their hatchets. They burned your sanctuary to the ground. They defiled the dwelling place of your name. They said in their hearts, we will crush them completely. They burned every place where God was worshipped in the land. We are given no signs from God, no prophets are left, and none of us knows how long this will be. How long will the enemy mock you, God? Will the foe revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the folds of your garment and destroy them. But God is my king from long ago. He brings salvation on the earth. It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of the Leviathan and gave it food to the creatures of the desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up the ever-flowing rivers. The day is yours, and yours also the night. You established the sun and the moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. You made both summer and winter. Remember how the enemy has mocked you, Lord, how foolish people have reviled your name. Do not hand over the life of your dove to wild beasts. Do not forget the lives of your afflicted people forever. Have regard for your covenant, because haunts of violence fill the dark place of the land. Do not let the oppressed retreat in disgrace. May the poor and needy praise your name. Rise up, O God, and defend your cause. Remember how fools mock you all day long. Do not ignore the clamor of your adversaries, the uproar of your enemies, which rises continually.
All right, thank you, Dell.
Sure.
All right, so this is most of the Psalms were written by David. We say that David, the laureate king or whatever, but this one is not. This is done by Asaph. So, on what basis did Asaph ask God to remember the people? Now, of course, all the answers are in the book. So it's not that hard a question, but I think as we go through this book, we'll find that, maybe the author is a little more Old Testament minded than we would be. If there's one critique I have on him, it's that it's as if the resurrection never happened to him when conclusions are made about what God is doing today. but we might talk more about that later. So what was the basis of God to remember his people?
Do you want us to just read that little part or what?
I suppose. I mean, like,
Answer.
you're not going to be
Right.
wrong because you have the answer in your book.
I don't say the question again.
Yeah, so we're on page 10.
Mhm.
The question is, on what basis did Asaph ask God to remember his people?
They are the sheep of God's pasture. They are the people God purchased. They are God's inheritance whom he redeemed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Sherry. Gold star for you today. On the surface, though, it didn't seem that the people belonged to God. What evidence did Asaph present? Well,
Everything was destroyed.
yeah. Yeah.
Everything they held dear was destroyed.
Yeah. And one thing that we find often, not just in Psalms of Lament, but just elsewhere in Scripture, is that a lot of times it seems like whoever is speaking is trying to remind God of who God is. And we saw this in the Exodus when Moses is talking with the Lord. He says, "Oh, don't let your enemies say that you let us out here just to die." You know, we don't have food or water. Maybe you help us out on that with some manna. And so there's a lot of like asking God to remember the nature of God in this. It's kind of a uniquely Old Testament attitude to have. I can't recall any time in the New Testament when there's a plea for God to remember who God is. There may be, but it's not coming to me. So is Asaph correct when he wrote that no prophets were left?
In that area, they weren't,
Yeah.
but Daniel and Ezekiel were in Babylonia, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there's nobody left in Jerusalem. So what did the survivors have to listen to in place of a prophetic word?
Everyone mocking them and hating them and
Mm-hmm.
probably spitting on them and whatever else.
Yeah, repeating questions they probably were asking themselves too.
Yeah.
And this later on in the scribe Ezra, he would try to understand, like after the exile, why it happened. And the answer they came away with was the mixing of blood and the turning away from God. And some of the actions they took based off of that weren't very loving because they broke up families.
Mhm.
But it's what they came up with. And a lot of people, like when there's a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake, ask why would God let this happen, or a pandemic, would God allow this to happen? And there's a whole slew of answers for that. Sometimes we say, well, God didn't allow that to happen. A more appropriate question would be, how is God working in the midst of this catastrophe?
Right.
I think that's a better question to ask. What is God teaching us through this? That's a better question to ask.
Mhm.
But we have to hesitate before we start making blanket statements that either condemn or exonerate entire swaths of population. I remember when was it 2009 when No, it was 2010 when the earthquake hit Haiti, and one of the televangelists said that's God's punishment on Haiti for its practicing or whatever. Of course, I had a friend that was killed in that earthquake.
Oh, yeah.
He was down there teaching at the Lutheran school, and so you just throw those people in there too. That was God's punishment, because they were down there serving God. So they're lumped in with that. I found that particularly distasteful. When Ben was, 25 years old when he died. So, yeah, we have to be careful not to speak so broadly that we gloss over the individual, which is what happened with Ezra and Nehemiah, unfortunately. Now, so what did we did that? Okay, so in spite of feeling abandoned because of the mockery of his enemies, Asaph, expressing no doubt the feeling of the whole community, refused to give in to despair. What was it that encouraged him and gave him hope for the future?
Yeah, it was his faith.
Mhm.
His faith in God. And
Yeah, and of course, the obvious comparison then is what is the pandemic really started to take hold, and it wasn't. We were starting to understand that it wasn't going to be a quick week or two of disruption. What was it that could you say the same?
Yeah.
When our
Yeah.
lives were totally disrupted.
yeah,
Mhm.
it got pretty scary
Yeah.
because it was just the unknown, right? There was a lot of fear of the unknown. I mean, it was an event that none of us had ever encountered. So it was pretty scary. So faith was important.
Yeah. It's almost like when you're scared before a plane takes off and you've never experienced that before. What do you do? Well, you remember that God has been with you in the past and will continue to be with you in the future. And that's where it goes into the application.
Mhm.
One of the best ways to remain faithful during difficult times is to remember what God has done in the past. God does not change. The God who showed us mighty power and us in the past is capable of doing so today, provided we let him. Now, I think that's an interesting and important point.
Mhm.
We can do all sorts of things faithfully, or we can go our own way. And in response to the pandemic, there were numerous articles I saw anyway of people that did not act in a very faithful manner,
Mhm.
or a very loving manner.
That people buying all the toilet paper.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
There was
I mean,
one thing that went
meat,
on.
meat,
Mhm.
stockpiling, yeah.
I say some of it was with the news, though. The reporting you were getting made you panic, They were making it sound so much worse and what could happen. And I know I panicked first.
Well, and I think that, at the beginning, there was no end in sight. We didn't have anything that could treat it. So, if you got it, you had to worry, you could die from it. And now I think people aren't as worried and they're seeing, bringing their faith back in people that have found a vaccine for it, that we can feel more relaxed about it if we do get it, at least there's treatment.
Mhm.
yeah, it was kind of interesting in that in a way, I think one thing we found, it took a while, but it actually created a lot more opportunities to serve others.
Mhm.
People like my mother-in-law that couldn't go out, so
Oh,
figure out how to get groceries for her, and just other people. I mean, it was scary, and but it also created opportunities to serve others.
Yeah,
mhm.
it sure did. It's burned a couple of new ministries here.
Yeah. I've found at the pantry, we all really had to be creative on how we would approach it, because before everyone came into the pantry and it was kind of a, get what you need, and then we help them carry stuff out, and we didn't worry about things. And now we had to not only think about them, but then the next person, so that we don't transfer any germs from one person to another. So we got really creative on setting tables outside and putting up cones. And it took a couple months, 2, 3, 4 months to get a good system going on how we would do this. And I've found that through this, we've found, people working together more, and those coming in are just so much more grateful. And I think we've taught them how to think about other people too, rather than just themselves when they come in too. So it's been a really good experience,
Yeah.
for us anyway, with the neighbors. Fun.
That's neat, Jeannie.
Yeah.
I never thought about that part.
Yeah, it's different now. I think we'll probably keep it in place. We really like, we really like things the way they're going now, and we feel like it's something we're gonna stick with. Not necessarily, we'll still start bringing groups back in, like the confirmation kids helping and stuff, but as far as the people that we serve, we really like the way we're doing it, and it's working out really well. And I think it's making them think about other people more too. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the benefits of it, Jeannie, is that we are learning new procedures. I mean, this is going to be one of the lasting effects of the pandemic, is that we are a little more mindful about the other. And, as we've been talking about maybe unfaithful responses, like we have seen faithful responses all around us in the pandemic, but the two most unfaithful responses, Kevin brought one up, the hoarding that went on. I had a friend in Holdridge. He was a pastor out there. He's not there any longer because he's doing a new ministry model in Lincoln of home church or house churches, which is really interesting. I think that's kind of the future of the church, actually. But at any rate, when that hoarding started, Tim did an open letter on Facebook, and it was, if you've hoarded, you can come and you can use the church as a means of selling at retail the items that you purchased and receive individual confession and forgiveness to the people that were hoarding stuff. And there's a difference, right, between being prepared to go a couple of weeks with water and food, and then doing what some people did and just buying out all the cleaning and then selling that on eBay at a vastly more upmarketed value.
I ran into that with my hairspray.
Well,
it was
well,
4 times the price I usually pay. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well,
really
and the shelves are all getting back to normal, but now it's people jumping the line to get vaccine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah. So, people will be people, but we see, that's not how we want to be.
No.
No, you know what I think will be great about our church? In the past, when I've had a cold or the kids had a cold, you hate to miss church because you have a cold. Well, I think now it's great because we won't feel stupid just putting your mask on if you have a cold. So you're not hacking at everybody when you come to church. Even if it's not, COVID, at least, maybe you'll keep your germs from other people when you're around them because you feel more comfortable doing that now, and no one will look at you like you're weird because you're wearing a mask.
Yeah, I tell you what, I know, because before the pandemic, if I saw somebody wearing a mask,
you're like,
that's kind of a weird way to do that.
Usually Asian people, and now we know why, because they've had so many issues with pandemics that they're used to it. And we're just, I've seen them on airplanes in the airport, when we travel, we go to museums, people walk around with masks, and it's like, what are you wearing that for? And I always thought, do you have something I need to be careful of? Or are you just thinking I might have something you might get? I didn't know for sure, but it's good. I like it. because I'm gonna wear it every time I go on a plane now. I'll look like a
Yeah.
weird.
I mean, we can eliminate the flu if we all wear masks in the fall and winter.
Yeah, it sure would help.
Well, and has anybody seen any statistics on the flu this year?
No.
Yeah.
It's like non-existent. I mean,
Yeah.
like literally you can count, it's like single digits number of cases reported.
Really? Kristen got it. She wears it everywhere, but their church has not had masks that she goes to in Lincoln for months now. And I said, that's probably where you got it. Somebody's passing it around there.
But as far as people hospitalized with the flu, it's just non-existent this year.
That's good. Yeah.
So there are good things.
So after we all get our shots, if you see me with a mask, either I didn't put my makeup on or I have COVID.
You know, that
That would not happen.
I have kind of taken an attitude of my wife during the winter in shaving her legs. Because I got a mask on, it covers my face. I am not shaving every day.
Here too.
Who
My
cares?
skin appreciates it. I don't get any irritation on the neck any longer if I'm shaving every other day. Nice.
I think everybody is more cognizant of just being a little bit more natural.
Yeah.
And not worrying about
Mm-hmm.
superficial issues, thinking that you have to shave every day. You don't have to, but because society has put this on us, but now we've learned it's not that big of a deal. We can relax and not have to worry about some of that stuff. And I'll be the first one to say I'm not good with makeup right now.
Really? With your offhand?
Yeah, exactly. Trying to do one.
Odell, when I saw you,
Don't
that's
need
the
it
first thing I
anyway.
thought. I'm just kidding. I would have no idea if you have makeup.
No, you look great without it. You don't even need it.
Well, but you do realize that looking back, there are things, because I have to work from home, I'm not as concerned about my makeup because nobody can see me.
Right.
And seriously, that's all I was getting at, was that, I don't worry about it now as much as I used to when I go out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, that leads into one of my favorite jokes, Del.
yes.
Why do women wear perfume and makeup?
To make us pretty.
It's because they're ugly and they smell bad.
Oh.
Yeah, you got me figured out.
We were listening to the radio the other day, and it's an old 70s song by Todd Rundgren, and he's, girls are stupid, but they sure are cute. And we couldn't help but laugh because that's just not what you say anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be censored today.
It would be
Yeah.
censored.
He'd be canceled. All right. Well, hi there.
Yeah, Clover. Hi.
I got to meet that little guy yesterday, or girl.
So let's go on down to the thought question here. We all want God's blessing, the blessing of being in the covenant, but how concerned are we about the honor of God's name? In other words, we are eager to fulfill our side of the covenant because we want God to receive the blessing he deserves. Well, excuse me. In other words, are we eager to fulfill our side of the covenant because we want to receive the blessings he deserves? All too often, God is mocked and or the name of Christ is reviled because of the attitudes and actions of those who claim to belong to him. Paul writes, you who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who brag about the law, do you dishonor God by breaking it? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. All right, so this is actually going a lot slower than I thought it would today, because we're already halfway through our session, and we're only a third of the way through the first session here. So, well, we'll just go on as well as we can. Let's think about that for a second. Are we terribly excited to fulfill our side of the covenant?
Pastor, can you clarify the covenant? What do you mean? What they
Right.
mean?
And so, yeah, so there have been many covenants. And if you've been paying attention in during our Lenten readings, the Gospels, particularly, well, in the Old Testament readings, we've been hearing a different covenant every week of Lent. So the first week it was the covenant that God made with Abraham. Last week it was the covenant that God made with Noah, was it? Did we have the rainbow last week?
Rainbow?
I think we did. This week it's the covenant that God made with Moses, the Sinai covenant, we say, when the 10 Commandments were given. And so God has made multiple covenants with God's people to govern the relationship and the expectations that God has with them. The Sinai covenant, the one we hear this week in Exodus 20, is probably the one that everybody thinks about the most, because it is the giving of the 10 Commandments to the people. And God said, you keep these laws, right? And you'll be my people and I'll be your God. And so the giving of the law to Moses, not only the 10 Commandments, but all the rest of the laws, like if you really want to fall asleep at night, you can read Leviticus. Where we see all of God's law kind of laid out. You can look at that stuff and say this was all given to us by God in order to live as a covenantal people. And of course, the thing with I guess that exterior sign of covenant is circumcision, and that was an outward sign of being part of the covenantal people, but the keeping of the law was a big part of that. So that's what it meant to be a covenantal people. And so when we talk about fulfilling covenant, it's fulfilling the law, right? Particularly after Sinai. So after the Exodus. So that's what he's referring to. But, and this is the big but here, because once again, I find that the author is too fixated on the covenants of the Old Testament for the Christian community, because there was a new covenant that God made with the world through Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And we celebrate this every other week at the church, right? This is my blood shed for you and for all people. This is the covenant, the new covenant. And so the sacrifice of Christ was the new covenant that God made, and which completely changed the relationship that God had with creation. And so this is the very question, how eager are we to keep the covenant? Well, we're not. Maybe it's a nice rhetorical question, but we're never eager to keep it. We know it's good because the law itself is a good thing. God gave it to us so that we could live in order and we wouldn't be in chaos. But it's something that we ultimately always fail to keep. And God was always having to punish his people because they were breaking covenant. They were breaking the law. And it wasn't until Jesus that finally God said for humanity, it's no longer up to you guys in keeping laws in order to reach salvation or in order to be in a right relationship with me, but it's now on my son and on what he has done in order to make a right relationship with me. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So this is a problem I have with the author. He's too fixated on the Old Testament covenants for a Christian. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to chapter 3, if we could, on page 15. Because I want to talk quick about the graffiti on the wall. Because we go back to Nebuchadnezzar now. And this is pretty quick after the first session we had. This is pretty quick in the narrative after that. King Nebuchadnezzar learned the hard way that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. However, he seems not to have made the connection that if the Most High is sovereign, he alone is worthy of worship. Though he acknowledged God, Nebuchadnezzar still clung to his idols. As is evident from their names, the lesson was lost on Nebuchadnezzar's successors as well. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562. His son Evil-Merodach was assassinated after only 2 years on the throne by his brother-in-law Neriglissar. Sorry, I don't speak Babylonian. This man, who was one of Nebuchadnezzar's generals during the campaign against Jerusalem, died 4 years later. His son Labashai Marduk lasted only 9 months before he was murdered. In his place, one of Nebuchadnezzar's son-in-laws, Nabonidus, took the throne. I wish I had made one of y'all read this part.
It sounds like the Kennedy family.
For various reasons, Nabonidus spent much of his reign outside of Babylon in Chaldea. Because of the administrative vacuum this created, he appointed his son Belshazzar as his co-regent to rule over the city and province of Babylon. While all this political maneuvering was going on, a new power was on the rise, a coalition of the Medes and the Persians, as the Medo-Persian Empire began to expand. Clashes between the Babylonians became inevitable. Nabonidus, who apparently commanded the Babylonian field armies, fled before the invaders without offering much resistance. Belshazzar, who was in charge of Babylon's defenses, brought a battle not far from the city. Upon being defeated, he withdrew his troops into the city. At that time of the story, we are going to look at, in this lesson, Cyrus the Great, the king of the Medes and Persians, had totally surrounded Babylon and placed it under siege. That would make like a really great Star Wars crawl. If we were this as a movie.
Yeah.
We come to Babylon, and the video pans down, and it's just the city of Babylon being surrounded by the Persian army. How fun! So there's a blasphemous party. Could somebody read us Daniel 5, 1 through 4?
I can read.
Actually, Sherry, if
Go
you
ahead.
wouldn't mind reading 1 through 17.
1 through 17. Okay.
Yeah.
King Belshazzar made a great festival for 1,000 of his lords, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar commanded that they bring the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought them in the vessels of gold and silver that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king of his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the wall of the royal palace next to the lampstand. The king was watching the hand as it wrote. Then the king's face turned pale and his thoughts terrified him. His limbs gave way and his knees knocked together. The king cried aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans and the diviners, and the king said to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever can read this writing and tell me its interpretation shall be clothed in purple, have a chain of gold around his neck, and rank third in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar became greatly terrified, and his face turned pale, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, when she heard the discussion of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall. The queen said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts terrify you or your face grow pale. There's a man in your kingdom who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, he was found to have enlightenment, understanding, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and diviners, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king said to Daniel, so you are Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard of you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that enlightenment, understanding, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and tell me its interpretation, but they were not able to give the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you are able to read the writing and tell me its interpretation, you shall be clothed in purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and rank third in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered in the presence of the king, let your gifts be for yourself or give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and let him know the interpretation.
Okay, thank you, Sherry.
Mhm.
Okay, so what was the big problem with this feast?
They were using those chalices for one thing.
Yeah, an affront to God for sure.
Mhm.
Imagine somebody breaking into the church and they get into the sacristy and they steal all of the chalices and they go home and they use them for a kegger.
You know, at my old church, which is in North Omaha, they did get robbed and they pawned like the cross and such that were on the altar.
Ugh,
Mm-hmm. Makes you
Yeah.
wonder.
thank you. Like the pawn shop wasn't like, obviously this is stolen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you for sure where they exactly took it, but yeah, they sold it.
Wow. Well,
Mhm.
Well, there's probably a lot of people today out there that would do that. I mean, the ratio of people that say they're atheist or worshiping other things now seems pretty high.
well, just
Scary.
the thought of doing that, of using sacramental vessels for a party, uh, is so bad. just
Mhm.
bad. And
Yeah.
so this is a problem. Now we keep in mind that Babylon is surrounded by an army while this feast is going on, and so that's also like when it's like the stories you hear of some of the parties that Hitler and Eva von Braun, it was a Brown or Bora, I can't, would throw in the bunker at the end of the Third Reich. I was like, you guys are crazy. Don't you see the writing on the wall? It's like, and of course, this is where that expression comes from.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to see that thousands of years ago,
Mhm.
something could have happened that is still in common usage today, as well. At least the reference to it is. Yeah. So
Yeah.
now, how did Daniel, who had the ability to notice or to understand the writing on the wall, how did he respond to the offering rewards for giving that translation?
Yeah. He didn't want them.
Yeah, he didn't want to have
Yeah.
anything to do with it.
Yeah. If this was if this was said today, he'd probably say, "Well, I'll tell you what it means, but you can take your stuff and you can take it."
Well, and then at the end, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, even if it would have, huh?
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting, the whole thing here. I'm going to go on to the application on page 18 here. All too often, people accuse preachers and church leaders of using their positions for personal gain. Unfortunately, there are many examples of where this is true. The Apostle Peter cautioned the elders to whom he wrote that they should be not greedy for money, but eager to serve. The Apostle Paul warned Timothy about people who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. When we present God's message to someone, there should never be any doubt about our motives for doing so. In Daniel's case, he was speaking to a man who had only hours to live. It was important for Belshazzar to realize that Daniel was not doing it for personal gain. On the contrary, under normal circumstances, the thing Daniel said could easily have resulted in his execution, because Daniel was willing to risk angering the king by refusing the reward. It was all the more reason for the king to listen to the message. Yeah. So in the past, there has been a sense that people would think that maybe clergy do what they do for personal gain. It's one of the reasons that for just ethics, when a gift is given to a pastor and it's a monetary gift, ethically you're supposed to give that back to the church as an offering. It's what I tend to do. And,
You do, yeah.
I said
Can't give gift cards back though, so give them a gift
right.
card.
Yeah. Well, gift cards usually go out to people in need.
I know you do, yep.
Unless it's like clothing, in which I'll use that because I never buy clothes.
They're Cabela's.
Yeah, Cabela's. Yeah. Sometimes, I need new ammunition or whatever. Yeah, and so that has adjusted how practices have done, but there have been plenty of times of corruption in the church. And this is the example set by Daniel is one of the ways that doesn't happen, and just refusing a monetary gain for the service. On the other hand, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay your pastor, because Paul also said that the laborer deserves his wages. Well, yeah.
But it's true. But I think a lot of people get caught up in that. I've met friends over the years that they don't go to church anymore, and they were Catholic. Most of them were Catholic. And I asked them why they don't. And they said, because the church is always asking for money. And so I've had to take time to explain to him where the money needs to go to, and how you can't reach out really, to people if you don't have the money. The church wouldn't be open, there wouldn't be lights, there wouldn't be water, there wouldn't be a pastor, because people can't afford to take care of their families if they're not being paid. So, it's funny though how people use that as a reason not to go to church or not to get involved or not to raise their kids a certain way,
Yeah.
I
And it's what they are, their excuses.
Yeah.
Right.
I was watching some shows on Netflix. I don't know if any of you watch any of the old ones that are, back in the 16, 17, 1800s, like the Borgias and, different things. Anyway, and they always bring in the church, and they're always doing it for money. And they always have, big rings on all their fingers, and they're being crowned, as the cardinal or whatever. And yeah, yeah. But I think every time I watch this, I think to myself, how can they have back then, thought that that's, and maybe they do it still now, I don't know, I'm not around that, but I think to myself, how can they think that that's pleasing to God, because I think a lot of it's based on historical things, of course it's historical fiction shows, but there's still a lot of it is what took place then.
Yeah, well, and the church has had moments and time periods of being corrupt.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's when Martin Luther left, right?
Yeah. It was one of the reasons why, particularly the practice of indulgences to raise money for building projects and things like that. Like at the time of Luther, the big fundraiser through indulgence was for St. Peter's Cathedral. But it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, and people wanted to buy that forgiveness because it was available, but Luther didn't really care for it. Some of the writings that Luther had against John Eck, or Johann Eck, who was one of the big indulgence preachers of the day, is hilarious. If you guys ever get a chance to read Luther's Table Talks, you really ought to get a copy. I'll let you borrow mine. Just put it, on the back of your commode and use it for personal reading. It's really funny. There's some really funny stuff in it. Yeah, most of my Luther quotes come from that. My favorite, well, no, this is being recorded, so I'll pass. Anyway, well, we only have about 4 more minutes, so maybe we won't be able to do 2 of these every time, because I don't want to just rush through them. But I did certainly want to talk about that, the imagery that's going on here with the Babylonians, with this writing on the wall, and they are about to face collapse. But the writing was also on the wall for the Hebrews too, or the Israelites. The prophets always were speaking against the depravity of God's people, and how they weren't going to the temple, and how they weren't giving time to God. And if they were giving time to God, it was lip service that didn't affect the rest of their experience in the world. Like, they would go to temple, they would keep the word of the law, but they wouldn't keep the spirit of it. And so they were breaking covenant all the time. And because they were, in some cases, just turning completely away from God and worshiping the gods of Babylon or the gods of Assyria. In Psalm 144, maybe? Psalm 120, either 44 or 22. It's, I lift up my eyes to the hill, from where does my help come? You guys, it's kind of a familiar line there from the Psalm. My help comes from the Lord. Well, the reason the psalmist was saying that is because on the hills is where they would have all these idol poles they would set up to worship Marduk or Baal or something like that. And so help doesn't come from the hills. Help comes from the Lord. And it was the psalmist's cry that, you can't look for other things to save you. And so the writing was on the wall for the Hebrews. Oh, what a good nurse, Nurse Richard.
I got dressed up for the occasion. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, good morning.
Right.
Yeah, I like your scrubs. And so we could think about what, before the pandemic hit, or maybe right when we saw that there was this thing that was going through the world, what was the writing on the wall that we failed to pay attention to that may have prolonged the pandemic?
The masks.
The
Putting
mask.
God first.
To take care of others and to take care of yourself and to take it seriously.
Yeah, basic health precautions.
And thinking of others, and there's still people that don't want to think of others. That's, they think about their rights of not wearing the mask rather than of what you're doing to help someone else not be sick,
Yeah, and when it comes to the church, Jeannie, I think that was the greatest sin that was committed during the pandemic. It was this freedom that in Christ that people were for personal preference and not for the sake of the world. And for the churches that continued to meet without any precautions at all, it's, well.
And they lost people.
Well, when people, certainly some people died because of it. But at the same time, this was the writing on the wall. And there's a lot of confusion at the time. I mean, we can look back at the Babylonian court. We can look back at the Hebrews and say, well, come on, for hundreds of years, the prophets told you this was going to happen. How could you not?
Mhm.
But it was at the time it was confusing, and there was a lot of confusion when all this started.
But the
Yeah.
Bible tells us that now, you know, we have that same word now. And we all don't listen to it. I mean,
No.
we can say we do, but there's always things that we're like, nah, you know, it'll be okay. But I mean, I myself through this whole pandemic just kept thinking, they're gonna figure it out, you know, just hang in there. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Sooner or later.
You know, Bill Gates had published a paper and did a video 5 years ago about how unprepared we were and that there would be a pandemic.
Yeah.
Devastating, and no one listened.
Weird, huh?
Prophets not being listened to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to think that if nothing else, you know, our church's response wasn't perfect. And when I say our churches, I mean the ELCA. We didn't have a perfect response, but I think it was at least in keeping with
Yeah.
the
I think we did well.
of the neighbor more than yourself, and the sacrificial love. So at any
We were a
rate,
little slow out of the gate, but I think that we picked up steam not too far out, you know, on how to deal with it and be safe for everyone.
yeah, I don't even think that we were terribly slow out of the gate. It wasn't our churches where outbreaks were happening, which
True.
I'm grateful
True.
for in that respect. But
Yeah.
there's a cost to it, because some people don't. Well, they weren't satisfied with that. So,
Right.
and it'll continue to be like that. But you know, I kind of think so. This year, the theme, of course, is that wilderness journey home. I think next year's theme will probably be the rebuilding of Jerusalem. All right, we're back. Let's look at the rubble and see what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Well, that wouldn't be bad.
So, well, let's see. Anyway, but you know, once again, this isn't unique in history, and we've seen it before, and unfortunately, we're going to see it again. But how we respond to things is our faith.
Everything seems unreal until you live through it, though. You know, you can read it in books, but you don't take it as seriously until you have to go through it yourself. That's just life.
Well, let's all be honest. How many of us were at least intellectually aware of the Babylonian exile before the pandemic? Yeah. Before seminary, I wasn't aware of it. It just, the knowledge was there, but our biblical literacy isn't where it needs to be. So, but anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Next week, we are still going to do the 2-chapter model. So we'll be on chapter 4 and 5. And I will be joining you from probably my brother's house in Texas, because I'll be leaving to come back up with the boys on Sunday. But there's only really 2 things I'm doing for work this coming week, and one is the daily devotions, and the second is the Bible study, because I'm glad to do it. I enjoy spending time with you guys, and I'm just waiting for that day where we can do this study in the room right next door to my office. And that's how it'll be. And we'll say, hey, we're just that one step closer from being in exile. So
well, have a good trip down to Texas.
Yeah.
Yes, do that.
Drive safely.
Hope Becky's better.
she is. Yeah, Becky got sick the day after the flight, and she was in bed most of the day, but she's feeling fine now.
Good.
So, well, you guys, thank you so much for your participation today, and I'll be more prepared next Saturday for our.
That was good.
That was good, yeah.
This was good.
Mhm.
All right.
Good seeing everybody.
Yeah, good to see you,
See
Jim.
you, Jim.
Thanks, Kevin, Jeannie, Elle, Sherry. We'll see y'all next time, and
Yeah.
everybody who's watching this
See you
later.
later.
Yeah, God's peace be with you all.
And with
Peace
you.
to you.